Welcome to the show, Amy and Julie. Maybe you guys could introduce yourselves before we jump into today's topic.
Sure. My name's Amy Mastrini, or Amy the Artist on social media. I'm an oil painter and a writer.
And my name is Julie Mastrini, and I'm Amy's twin. And I am a writer, and I work for a website that rates media bias.
So you both write for Evie Magazine, right?
Correct.
And could you describe a little bit what's the topic or editorial angle of Evie?
Evie is, I believe their tagline is encouraging women to seek truth and seek beauty and find truth. I should memorize that. But it's basically a women's magazine that, when I talk to people about it, I sort of tell them it's like if Cosmo had good values. So it's beauty, relationships, culture, content for women, but it is following a more traditional set of moral values than you see in a lot of modern mainstream women's publications.
The goal is to help women. A lot of it is like marriage focused, and for women who want to establish long-term relationships. There's career advice, there's health advice, there's a lot of articles about like why patriarchy is good and modern feminism isn't so good, and
it's like skeptical of the modern feminist movement and questions things like widespread use of birth control and more holistic natural approaches to women's health and things like that.
So it sounds like it's comments on female topics, but in a way like similar topics to what a women's magazine would, but in a way that helps women not totally wreck their lives with like whatever the latest moral fad is.
Right, exactly. The values are more eternal and established and time-tested, things that actually work for women to help them get to a good place in their lives, not to end up in a bad place.
Pro-sexual boundaries and pro-monogamy and
anti-modern feminism.
Yeah.
So that's a good jumping off point for the topic I wanted to talk with you today, which is this documentary that you saw recently, Amy. Would you mind telling us about that?
Yeah, there was a documentary on HBO released in October called What Happened to Brittany Murphy, and it is about a celebrity. She was an actress in Hollywood in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and she was not super famous, but she was getting there. She was in 8 Mile, Uptown Girls, Clueless. Yeah, that's 8 Mile.
I liked 8 Mile.
Yeah, 8 Mile. Men will know her from 8 Mile, and women will know her from Clueless. So yeah the two genders. And it focuses on her life, and she died suddenly at 32 under mysterious circumstances. But it turns out it wasn't so mysterious. Some of it's mysterious, but a lot of it had to do with her predatory and abusive, kind of overtly, like not explicitly abusive, but like implicitly abusive husband who cut her off from all her family and except her mom and her friends, and she wasn't allowed to have access to her email, access to her phone. If anyone wanted to work with Brittany, they had to go through this man, and this man had a huge history of he had done this to another woman, and he had felonies. He was a huge liar. He said he was a billionaire, and he wasn't. He was just a con man and a predator. And a big part of the story, it made me think, Brittany Murphy was raised by a single mom, and she didn't have a stable father figure in her life. So I think she also wanted to settle down and get married, and she had gone through a string of failed relationships in her late 20s. And I think this kind of was a perfect storm that made her vulnerable to this predator, because he came in as a husband/father figure to her and said, I'm going to manage your career and I'm going to take care of you and your mom. And he was very, very charming. And I just think that it made me reflect on how these stories usually have an absent father in them, or like a toxic masculine father, and how this opens up women to abuse.
So what's the mechanism there? Is it just like the lack of modeling good behavior or something like that?
That's what we were discussing, is how we obviously didn't know Brittany Murphy, but whenever there's an absent father, you can pretty much guess that a woman didn't have a model of virtuous masculinity in her life. So then she doesn't know what to look for in a man, or what traits to select for or to select against when choosing a partner. And then she may run into this And maybe she's even like particularly vulnerable because she's in an industry that can be very predatory in the first place, and the people that she's surrounded by are not the best. And then she has a hard time selecting for a man who's virtuous.
Yeah, and you were talking about how the lack of virtuous masculinity in a place like California. California is not really known for like its traditional values, right? It's a very experimental, progressive place. The lack of virtuous men creates a vacuum where toxic men, masculine men who are predators and dominating can come in and take advantage of the young women there. And I really see the women kind of have this innate desire for like partnership and marriage, I think, and that is really taken advantage of by these types of men.
Yeah, that's an interesting dichotomy that you're drawing between virtuous masculinity and toxic masculinity, which we hear a lot about toxic masculinity in the media nowadays, where like feminism or commentators from the left are condemning bad behavior by men, many of which are actually bad, like the Harvey Weinsteins of the world and people like that. But we don't hear of like what virtuous masculinity is. And I think that if there will be masculinity, because like men want to be around women and women want to be around men, but if you don't have virtuous masculinity, then there's a vacuum in which the toxic kind will appear.
Yeah, and feminism doesn't. Feminists will say that they are in favor of women making their own choices, even if that includes wanting to be a wife and mother. And I think that feminists maybe say that, they pay lip service to it, but don't. I don't know that they truly believe that is what's best for women. But let's take them at face value and say that they do believe that it's fine if a woman is a wife and mother, and if that's what she truly believes will, lead to her empowerment or whatever. Feminists have no message for women about how to identify a good man. They have a lot to say about what makes a bad man, and I think a lot of what they have to say about that is actually off the mark too. We were talking about this concept of mansplaining and how it's somehow terrible if men like explain things to women. If there's like a topic a woman doesn't know about and a man is explaining that topic to her, it's like supposedly this terrible thing, which I disagree with. And I think there's nothing wrong with men explaining things to women.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of humility. I don't know everything. Like, it's fine if somebody needs to explain something to me. And it's fine if that person is a man. So I don't know everything. But anyway, feminism has all these messages about how women should be like free to make their own choices. But if she does want to make the choice to become a wife and mother, it has nothing to say about what does a good man look like and how does a woman identify that. And that's like just kind of a conversation that's very missing from the culture.
Yeah, that's definitely a topic that I don't hear coming from like the sort of the progressive outlets. Like, how do you identify a good man? It's like, it's more about it seems like their mindset is more just around personal choice. Like, do you enjoy being around the man? But as far as like, is he like good for a long-term relationship, and is he going to lead you to a good place? Like that's not a conversation we hear a lot.
Right, and men aren't getting that message either. Actually, we were talking about the like red pill movement, right? Which is in a way sort of like filling this space where men want to be instructed in how to be men and how to get women, but it's this perverted version of it where it's like distorted and off, and it's teaching them how to just like add notches to their belt, right? Like, and how to just sleep with women and create these sort of short-term hedonistic momentary pleasurable hookups that aren't leading to any sort of long-term meaning in their lives. So there's obviously this like void in this space that exists, that's being filled by these like very sort of toxic ideologies about like how to be a man.
Yeah, it seems to me like if the culture is not teaching men how to be men in a positive way, and if the culture is not giving them avenues to have fulfilling positive interactions with women and partnerships with women, then they will seek ways to be with women, how to be successful with women, how to get the girl, right? And so I think the red pill movement offers that, but without any of the morality of traditional religion or traditional society that might lead them to also have positive some relationships with women.
Yeah, like some of the concepts that you hear, like Christians talk a lot about, like humility, being humble. A lot of these virtues that are focused on in traditional religions are totally absent in like the red pill space, or even in feminism when it's telling women how to be is lacking that.
Yeah, they're both really manifestations of pride, right? So the red pill, well, number of sins, lust and pride, right? The red pill for men is really based on like how many women can you sleep with, how can you be like an alpha, even though their idea of an alpha is completely wrong, because an actual alpha is like a family man, not like a playboy. And then the feminists are prideful in that they think they don't need a man, and they're not in a symbiotic relationship with women, and that we're inherently like connected to one another, and that they can just be sexually liberated, which is a lie or an oxymoron at least, and that will lead them to fulfillment. So both are prideful, and like they're kind of two sides of the same coin actually. The men kind of thinking how can they like manipulate women into sex, and the women kind of also using men for sex, or just completely not wanting to like work with men or appreciate them in any way.
Yeah, I think there's a real frustration in like the quality of partners available to both men and women out there. Like if you have standards, you might find that good partners just aren't available, even if you know what to look for, because people aren't really being trained in that. That's not what our culture is producing.
Yeah, there's no messaging about how to be a good man or how to be a good woman. What does that look like? There's a lot of like criticism and takedown, and even in the red pill sphere, like a lot of it is about how like, oh, if you marry a woman, she's just going to divorce you and take your money, so you might as well just like pursue these meaningless hookups. And then on the feminist side, it's like, oh well, men ain't shit, so just like follow your own path, and you don't really need them anyway, blah blah. So it's just like there's no like positive messaging about like how to become someone that would be able to be in a long-term, stable, and meaningful relationship. And like, what does that look like? What behaviors and values and virtues do you embody to achieve that?
So getting back to the Brittany Murphy story, now the guy that she married, it sounds like he might be exceptionally bad, like on the sociopath kind of scale, but obviously given how she grew up and what she knew, she wasn't able to determine that this was someone that was going to exploit her and ultimately lead to her early death. But were there any signs like that an outside person could have picked up that like this was a particularly bad man?
An outside person, it sounds like everyone really picked up that he was a bad man because they weren't able to contact her anymore. And we tell women this, that if he's trying to keep you away from your loved ones and your family and friends instead of like integrate with them, then doesn't have your best interests in mind. So I think that was the biggest flag that other people picked up on. There were other actresses and people around her that noticed what was going on but weren't able to get her away from him. And from her perspective, I mean, that should have set her off too. If she couldn't even have her own phone or access to her email, then that's pretty troubling. But it was all under the guise of I'm going to manage you and like help you. So
why do you think that didn't set off a red flag for her? Why did she stick around?
Did I mention this, that she had been really wanting to settle down and get married and was having trouble matching that with a man? Like her engagements kept ending. She'd been engaged at least twice, and this man came around and like wanted to marry her, and was like they were both serious and like ready to get married. I think she really wanted to get married, and she really wanted like a stable man in her life. And the problem is this man was going to be around, but for all the wrong reasons. So I think that this desire in women gets taken advantage of quite a bit by sociopathic men.
Yeah, that's really tragic that you have someone that's like kind of figured out that she wants to live a more stable life and have a more stable family life, and then someone comes in and takes advantage of that. It's like that wholesome desire kind of becomes taken advantage of.
Yeah, and I don't know her or anything, but she seemed pretty like pure and pleasant, and I really do think there are like dark forces out for like pure night, like wherever there's like light and like something good, there's going to be forces that want to corrupt it. And
well, it also kind of goes back to her not having a father, and like what is the father's role in helping their daughters to vet suitors, right? Like that.
Oh,
That's
right.
another thing that's sort of been lost from our culture. We were talking earlier about atomization, right, and how uh, in the past you would have a community, and that's kind of where you were drawing your pool of potential partners from, and everybody knew each other, and so you could observe someone through time and their relationships with other people and what type of person are they and judge their character, because that's just how we lived. But in the modern world, Americans are very much encouraged to be individualistic, follow their own path. I mean, the path for people is to like go to college, typically farther away from home, and then from there, like go to a major city to like pursue a career, and that's kind of like the path a lot of people take, and that rips you out of your like
Protective network.
the network of people that like know you, have known you for a long time, like whatever. I mean, it depends on how you were raised, but
Well, that concept of like having a protective network, like that's like a concept I feel like most people don't even have. Like the idea that your
Right.
friends and your family that know you would be looking out for you,
or that
and
they should.
or they should be, and that they have, that they meet who you're dating and have some input on it. Like it sounds really just bizarre to modern ears, right?
Yeah, there's this man on Twitter that I'm friends with. He runs an account called the Chivalry Guild, and it explains how to be chivalrous to young men. And he tweeted once that men should visit and court women on their territory. Like a man should enter into a woman's space where like her father is nearby, her friends are nearby, her community is, and that demonstrates actual bravery, and it shows that like he's not trying to pull her away from people who would protect her. So I think about that quite a lot.
Yeah, it kind of compels him to a higher standard of behavior because he's going to be vetted and judged by people around her who care about her, and her being the more like vulnerable one in the situation. I mean, just by sheer virtue of like physicality, women are more vulnerable, right?
Right. It's easier to get away with hurting someone if they're atomized and an individual in like a city away from their community where you don't have as much accountability. And I also think cities draw a lot of types of people like this because there's more anonymity. Like, they won't get away with being that way in a small town. So
Yeah, people will talk.
yeah, people will talk.
Yeah, I think this is an important point, especially for, I think COVID's made this a lot worse,
Yeah.
where a lot more people are dating online. Like when I think of when I was away from my family when I was dating and away from the place I grew up, but I was in the Bay Area for 8 years and had some continuous friends during that time. And then, and mostly was dating people that we were kind of in the same social networks. And maybe it's not quite as good, especially when people have really laissez-faire morality. But, people knew me, people knew her, and we had mutual friends when I was dating people there. And then I was in Austin for 3 years, and mostly dating within communities of people I knew, although also dating apps, which a lot of times dating apps are people that you have, you know nothing about other than their profile and like whatever they told you.
Right.
But then now with COVID, it's if you don't mind me talking a little bit about your dating life, Amy, you've been dating people from around the country that contact you over the internet, and
Because we live in a small town.
yeah, because we live in a small town where there's not a whole lot of mate choices, so you're meeting people online, but we've tried to improve upon the model of a rando that we don't know coming to town to meet you by at least having like your sister and your to-be brother-in-law here and your parents and your family and your other friends. And so we get it's more than just you seeing a guy that comes here to visit you. Like you get a couple of pairs of eyes on him.
Right.
But also you have the morality or the worldview where you care about what your family and friends think about someone you're dating, where not everybody has that.
Right. Not everyone. I think even my parents have said before, like, well, it's ultimately up to her. It's like, I don't really operate that way. I think it like is a community, like who you marry and form a long-term relationship with is actually a community situation.
Well,
So-
and I think that marriages actually have a better shot at lasting if that is the idea going into things. Is
Right.
that like we're not just this atomized partnership, but we exist within this larger whole, and our relationship, it matters who we're surrounded by and how we treat and are
they'll
treated by
hold you
people.
accountable to stay together. And
This is one of the things that I used to hear in the Bay Area that like blew my mind. People who were like polyamorous, right? And so they'd be in an open relationship, and then like I remember hearing this story about this woman who was in an open relationship and her boyfriend went off and was like at a getaway with some friends, and he was like flirting with some other girl while there, and all of her friends were there and like witnessed this, and none of them told her because like they're in an open relationship, it's fine if he like flirts with some other girl, right? So like that, the like accountability factor of like keeping them monogamous, keeping them like on the straight and narrow for the health of their relationship was just like not like something in anybody's minds, right?
Right, because it's all about freedom as the highest value.
Right.
Well, he's free to act as he wants.
Yeah.
Because we're so into freedom.
Yeah.
And it's just disastrous for relationships.
Yeah.
But,
So I'm starting to run out of camera battery here.
Okay.
So let's wrap this up. Can we wrap this up in a couple of minutes?
Yeah.
Want to
sure.
tie a bow on what we've been talking about?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. The conversation was mostly about like how women can identify virtuous men and what is needed to form a long-term pair bond with another person.
And also, I guess this documentary about Brittany, it's a tragic story, but I think it's just kind of indicative of like what the reduction in social capital that we have means for women.
Yes, it's particularly disastrous for women, I think.
I mean, especially in places like Hollywood, California, Silicon Valley, New York, that are these big atomized, anonymous cities, but also in general.
And fatherlessness, right? The rise of, you look at the stats on fatherlessness in the US, it's like pretty bad.
Almost every social issue tracks back to fatherlessness.
Yeah.
Like there's a root cause there. Every mass shooter, every like damaged young child star, like all of it, it just traces back to fatherlessness. So we like dads.
We like dads.
Good dads.
We like good dads and virtuous men.
And I think like a complete feminism needs to include like how to raise virtuous men.
Yes.
Right.
Like it can't miss that part. Like feminism of the past has talked about the forces that oppress women or keep them from fulfilling their potential, but it hasn't talked about like the toll that bad men have on women. Maybe it's even done that, but it hasn't had the positive vision of how do you make good men,
Right.
In fact,
can protect women who want to. And that to me is like maybe part of the whole Jordan Peterson phenomenon. So my thesis is Jordan Peterson is a fifth wave feminist.
That's funny. I don't know. Should we stop there?
Yeah, let's tie it up. Thanks
That's a good
for
place.
coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.